This next one's going to be a little bit easier, believe it or not, because it's actually, it happens to work out to where the chapter is the section, right? So chapter 3 works all on its own. But it's actually interesting. We have a little bit of a shift in terms of what it's about, because it may not seem so. Usually, so chapter 3, outside of faith without works is dead from chapter 2, probably the most famous part of James is chapter 3 on taming the tongue. And in fact, your translators, to help you out, have a section that verses 1 through 12, usually in Bible translations, if you're going to have headings, the heading is usually something about the tongue, and usually it's taming the tongue. And then you have this other section on 2 different kinds of wisdom. Again, for the translations I've seen, that's usually, it usually says something about wisdom or true and false wisdom or something like that. And that's for the end, 13 through 18. But these are actually unified, believe it or not. There's a unity to these. And when you hit James, one of the bits, and I think we've seen it a little bit today, about figuring out, rather than looking at it, there's these random bits that James is putting together. And I hope you've seen the connections. I think we made some good connections so far in how we've looked at it. One thing you got to look for is there's little hooks, and they're not always immediately obvious. Little bitty hooks that are telling us, hey, there's this section that's all together, but it seems like it's not. But if you just take one little hook and you loop it all around, you see what's happening. And here's the hook here. Rather than having taming the tongue, 2 kinds of wisdom, what about chapter 3, verse 1? Here's what James says. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. And then he goes on about the tongue. The hook here for all of chapter 3 is there's some strife going on in this community. We talked about internal and external, so there's in chapter 1, there's the external trial. They're being persecuted to some extent. And then there's the internal trial, which is actually just temptation, when we are tempted to stray away from God. The external trial in chapter 2, and actually I failed to make note of this, I apologize, is that he says in chapter 2, verse 6, that you have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are not they the ones who are dragging you into court? Are not they the ones who are blaspheming the noble name of him being Jesus, to whom you belong? That's their external trial. They've been scattered to some extent by some kind of persecution. We start that out in terms of how he describes them in chapter 1, verse 1. They're scattered among the Gentiles, the 12 tribes scattered. Now you see a little bit more focus. There are some rich people who are causing them trouble, or at least by way of contrast, these people are more rich than they are, right? And they're dragging them into court, right? And they are blaspheming Jesus. See that? So that's the external. So you got the internal and external trial going on. And we see it even, this last section we looked at, you got pollution from the world versus pollution from within ourselves that we have to deal with. Internal, external. Now we have, within the community, we have this internal strife. There's external problems caused by whoever these rich people are who are giving them trouble, right? And then whoever's been persecuting them might be the same people. But now within their community, they have issues. And this 3 and 4 are going to speak a lot to this. And you see it here. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. And we're going to pick it up at the end of 3, and you're going to see this being drawn out even more with what's happening within this community. So let's read all of 3 right now quickly. We're going to go through it. It's relatively short compared to the rest of the chapters anyway, so it should go by fast. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who's never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, and no human being can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings and who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. Who's wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy, full of good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. All right, so we start out with this exhortation to people who want to be teachers. The people who want to be teachers. And that's it. It's funny because it feels like that's weird, but if you take it in the whole, if you take that and you run with that as the theme, things start to make sense. In what sense do you see this warning? It's a warning about people who teach. In what sense does James flesh this warning out in all of three, which I think goes together? What's the warning here for teachers? Some of this is kind of explicit. Don't be afraid to say the obvious thing. But what are some of the warnings here for people who aspire to be teachers?
What's that? You'll be judged more. Yeah, you'll be judged more strictly.
Amen.
I would also say it's you can cause a lot of damage. You know, you can build up a lot of goodwill through your life, and you can tear it all down with one sentence.
Good. Yep, I like that. Yep, teachers can do a lot, and any leader can do lots of damage with words, and quickly. It doesn't take much. Doesn't take much. Good. Excellent. Good. Look at B. Will be judged more strictly. Teresa said that one. Todd, you have teachers or leaders in general can do lots of damage with their words. That scares me. I'm not gonna lie, it does, man. It scares me. I speak lots of words on the regular. I'm doing it now. Right? Good. Say again. Steer people. Good. Talk about that.
So as you're teaching people, if your, I guess, theology for, I don't know how you would word it, is maybe a bit askew and not quite right, then you can take and you can steer that group of people that you're teaching off into that direction, which is not necessarily a godly direction. So there's a lot of power that teachers have because people will follow them and they'll guide them.
Good. Excellent. Good. So yeah, you steer people. Your teacher, you steer people. You steer them we steer them theologically. You steer them practically in how they should live. Excellent. Good.
And so it's not always about steering them like in an obviously wrong direction. Man, you put a ship off course just a tiny bit, and you let that go for a long time, and man, you're way off course.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. Good. Excellent. Yeah, teachers do have a lot of power. Yeah, the horse image really hits that. A horse is an incredibly powerful animal. I mean, that's why I'm nervous around horses. Horses scare me because they're huge and they're muscular. I mean, they are really tough. And I don't trust in my capacity to steer this animal. I'm amazed by people who can handle horses because it's such an art to be able to handle a horse. And that's how, James there is saying that the tongue is very small, but it's in charge of something bigger than itself, in the same way that a bit operates with a horse or a rudder operates with a ship, right? And so if that's for good, which he doesn't spend a lot of time on actually, if it's for good, that could be amazing. But here, clearly there's something going on in this community, and he's worried about the bad bit. Yes?
Mary Hilliard online says, focusing more on inner life than the tongue helps us use words more wisely.
Love that. Wow. Focusing on inner life rather than the tongue helps us to use words more wisely. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, because he says that, and what backs up what Mary just said is that he says that, let's find a verse here, where he talks about the boasts that the tongue can make. I am utterly not able to find that right now, and that's sad. 5. Okay, thank you, Todd. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider that a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. It's small, but it makes great boasts. Because you can say all kinds of things that are not reality. That's the thing about the tongue. The tongue allows us to live in. You can either have a tongue that, if, as Mary said, we're focused on our inner life. If we're focused on our inner life first, right, then our tongue's going to reflect reality. That's good, right? And so all linking up what we talked about before, clearing out the moral filth, letting the seed of the gospel have deeper roots, fewer thorns, more fruit. If we're focused on that, then the tongue can actually reflect reality. Great stuff. Rock and roll, that's wonderful, rock star. If not, and if there's weeds growing everywhere and all that, the tongue's going to make all kinds of boasts that don't reflect reality and they're not based in any kind of good works, that's why James focused on works, tangible, show me, right? He's like, some people call James the show me letter. Show me, forget your mouth, show me, right? And the tongue will make all kinds of great boasts if there's not an inner life to steer. Because what steers the tongue? That's the question. If the tongue steers this, what steers the tongue? Mary already talked about it, the inner life. Deeper roots, fewer thorns, more fruit. That steers the tongue. If not, the tongue is going to be crazy and won't live in reality. Right? And it will produce lies, unreality. Right? Which is, we see this now. Think about social media. Think about how much unreality. Think about that. Oops. Okay, bad pastor. Right? Didn't silence my phone. Sorry, folks. But think about how much unreality there is in social media and media in general. Great boasts that are made. Think about that, right? Something scared me recently. When I first came here, we were a part of a church. I wasn't pastoring at the time, but we were part of a really good church, a great church. They loved us in very powerful ways, and it was a great church to be a part of, and we loved the church, and we were very much involved in it. And they gave us a going away gift, and it was a few books. Like, they gave us a few books, and one of the books is a really, like, a highly regarded book for pastors, warning pastors about exactly this. I mean, you could. I mean, it's got a lot to it, but it basically living in unreality as a pastor, right? And basically, like, hey, you need to watch yourself as a pastor, and you need to live right because it's easy for a pastor to not live right. And I was very happy to get that book. I'm like, thank you. You knew exactly what I need, right? Here's what scared me about that book. On the back of it, there's, like any book, there's reviews, blurbs by people who are like, oh, this is the coolest book ever. And, and it's heavy hitters. Two of the pastors who gave glowing reviews for the book are now out of ministry. One of them because of moral failure. Deep, crazy pants moral failure. Another who's left the faith. Publicly, one of these people now, I guess they're called, deconstructors? And he's left the faith, very publicly left the faith. A highly regarded figure. Another guy, deep trouble. There's some deep trouble brewing. It's been pretty public. And I told Alyssa that, my wife, I was looking at it and I went, Alyssa, this is really scary to me that there's three people who spoke glowingly about a book that's warning pastors, people like me, about living in unreality on Sunday morning, speaking one thing, and then the inner life is wrecked. And three of them are in serious trouble. Two of them are not even in ministry anymore. One of them, there's some wonky stuff going on, right? Yikes. And it's like, that's why he starts out with, this is not just about the tongue, even though it is. He starts out with, not many of you should aspire to become teachers because the judgment's stricter. That's why. And it's scary. It's scary. You gotta live in reality. Inner life, if the tongue is a rudder that steers the ship, what steers the tongue? Mary hit it. A right inner life. Deeper roots, fewer thorns, more fruit.
And she went on to say, if we could totally tame our tongue, we would be perfect, because everything else will follow.
Amen. Good word. If we could totally tame the tongue, we'd be perfect. Everything else will follow. Good. And that's essentially what James says. Basically, like if you could tame the tongue, you would be perfect. Because you'd have the inner life would match the outer. Exactly. You'd have total alignment, which is what we strive for as believers. That's what we strive for, is alignment. The inner and the outer match. Right. There we go. Excellent. Good. In that second section, though, there's still warning. He still keeps it up. So focusing beyond the tongue, because we want to talk about the unity of this section. Verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. What's the warning there? He's still continuing to warn there. He hasn't stopped. What's the warning? Before it's stricter judgment, control of the tongue. What's happening now? You could obviously read beyond that one verse there and see what he's getting at.
I think one of the big warnings there is to be real about what's happening in your life. It seems so odd to read, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it.
It's like, who boasts about that?
Who would boast? But people do. People do. That's the thing. It's so crazy. It's typically not in the church, I hope. But the thing here, that's, outside the church, you'll have people boast about it all the time. But to deny the truth, man, that's us. It's so hard to have a thing where, you can be accountable to one another and not have people condemning you. You want to condemn yourself a lot of times. But how do you be open about that? And that's what he's getting at.
Yep, that's it. Yeah, it is. You're right. It is weird to read that. I've read chapter verse 14 before, and I'm going, who does that? I mean, who harbors bitter envy and selfish ambition in their hearts, and then boasts about it, and or deny the truth. Basically, it's like it's the equivalent of denying the truth. That's what he's getting at there. It is you may as well deny the truth because that's what it is. You're not living in truth, and it's like it's everywhere. Who doesn't? Who doesn't? It's anything. It definitely is anything, and it's easy to do. It's easier than you might think, especially in an age where we have platforms. We all have a platform. If you have a social media account, you have a platform. You have a stage, right? What is it? Andy Warhol predicted that everybody would get 15 minutes of fame. He was so dead on. It was kind of a secular prophecy. He was dead on. Everybody would get their 15 minutes. We've had way beyond our 15 minutes, right? And that's what's happened. So it's easy to just be someone else. It's easy in this age to look like something you're not. It's easy for all of us to do, and it's like we need this check about, am I living in reality? And here's the check. The check is interesting. It's he talks about basically he's talking now about pseudo wisdom. Now remember, he's wrapping back around. One of the things about James as you read it is James, what he does is he doesn't keep everything in nice, neat little boxes. He does have a structure, but he will go back to something he hit on way earlier. Actually, all the apostolic letters do this, really. They all do it. He hits on wisdom, he's back to wisdom again. He's back to wisdom. Remember what he says as he starts out. He says, hey, if you lack wisdom, ask God. He gives generously and without reproach to everybody, right? Now he hits on fake wisdom, right? And with fake wisdom, he said, basically, in this translation, it's in quotation marks, such so-called wisdom, or wisdom doesn't come down from heaven, but it's earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. Basically, that boasting stuff where what's coming from the tongue doesn't match the inner reality, or I got to get my platform straight, I got to look like this, I got to look like that. It doesn't work, right? You're going to have, and it's funny what he says. He says, under the hood, you will find disorder in every evil practice, meaning that you're going to find a hot mess. The inner life is going to be a hot mess if there's all this ambition and falsehood coming out. And this community, you think about a community under persecution, that's under trial. You're going to have, it's tough to keep everything together. And here you got some people rising up, maybe wanting to be leaders, specifically teachers, right? And they didn't have the inner pedigree. And they were, to compensate for a lack of the inner pedigree, they're focused on the outer, right? And James is like, don't do that. Because if you're doing that, it's actually worse than you understand what's happening. There's something really crazy going on underneath. If we got to project this image about how awesome we are when we're not, it usually means there's something shockingly bad happening underneath the hood. It's real bad, right? And James is saying, watch out, because the imagery here is really scary. Disorder in every evil practice, it's almost like a garden of evil. Everything you could imagine is happening, or there's the potential for everything you could imagine. It's crazy. But how do you distinguish between, what's the opposite though? So how would you know? Because you could have someone good on your hands. You could have somebody who is worthy of being a teacher or a leader. He gives us some hope here. There's a ray of sunshine here. In verses 17 through 18, we're grabbing for it. We're like, please give me something. Right? What does he give us? And look very closely at what he gives us, or what it means.
Well, I think one of the things that we get there is that those who do things the right way for the right reasons they'll see a harvest. You peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness, which always makes me think of I think it's Hosea, the verse where it says, plant the good seeds of righteousness, you'll harvest a crop of love. So, do things the right way, you'll get good results.
Good. So good fruit. Excellent. And remember, James is all about results. Show me. Show me. Right? Good. Excellent. Anybody else want to weigh in on the live stream? We got you. We are listening. Also, too, you look at these things he talks about here. The wisdom that comes from heaven. So now you have this wisdom from heaven as opposed to wisdom from below. Wisdom from heaven as opposed to wisdom from hell, basically. And if it's from heaven or from above, it's pure, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial, sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. These are, for the most part, these are things that happen in community. These are things that happen in community. Outside, the first one could be either or. It could be just kind of individual, just kind of you before God, or it could be in community. First of all, pure. But the rest of them, peace-loving. How do you know you have peace between people? It's got to be in community. Considerate, community. You know, if I looked at someone and said, you're a considerate person, well, that has to be towards somebody. If you were living on an island, I can't say that. It doesn't make any sense, right? Submissive, again, that's got to be, I'm submitting to somebody. Full of mercy and good fruit. Again, that's got to happen within an interpersonal relationship, right? Impartial, there we go back to partiality before. The rich person who shows up in your church service versus the poor person who shows up in your church service. Sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. These are communal things for the most part, right? These are things that have to happen in community. Basically, if you want to figure out if somebody is just operating with wisdom that sounds awesome and might make them look good as a teacher or a leader, versus somebody who's operating with the thing that is good and is from heaven, what impact do they have on your community? See that? Are these people who are peace-loving? Do they love peace or do they make conflict? You have these folks who float from church to church and they wreck every church that they're a part of. Right? You have conversations with them. Hey, so just tell me your background. And they got like 8 churches in a very short amount of time that they've been a part of. And every one of them, something went wonky. Well, I left because of this, left because of that. It's like, I'm sorry. Unless you're talking about 8 churches over like decades, Houston, we have a problem. Or maybe you moved or something like that. I can live with that. That's fine. We're in a society that's a bit more mobile now. My family is also in that category as well. We've moved quite a bit in 17 years of marriage. Okay, I can hear that. But like you get this like little bit of time in like a lot of churches and like always left because something was wrong, something was wrong, something was wrong, something was wrong. It's like maybe the problem's in the room. Maybe the problem's in the room. Because if I got to roll the dice, I got to say either you just have like terrible luck with running into congregations, or maybe the problem's in the room. See that? Maybe the problem's in the room. Considerate, submissive. These are community builders. These are people who they're operating with wisdom from above. They're in alignment with their inner life, and their tongue is in alignment. And so because of that, they're sincere, they're transparent, and they're community builders. They're people who promote community. They connect community. I remember when the Miami Heat kind of first formed this big super team. It was, they had Dwayne Wade, and then they had Chris Bosh came over, and then, of course, LeBron James, who wanted to win a title because he had maxed out everything he could do in Cleveland, at least at that time. And they formed this super team, and they were even called the Heatles, like after the Beatles. And so they had their first season together, and they of course romped through the NBA and did really well, and it was great. and they went up against the Dallas Mavericks, who did not have a big three. They had Dirk Nowitzki, who was a Hall of Fame caliber player, great player and everything, in Dirk Nowitzki. But outside Dirk Nowitzki, they didn't have any huge names, right? But yet, the Dallas Mavericks beat the Heat. I mean, the Heat went on to win some other titles, with that lineup. That's fine. But the Dallas Mavericks beat them in this first year, and everybody was like, what in the world? Like, how did that happen? It was funny what commentators said, and it was right, is that the Dallas Mavericks, the Heat had the big three, but the Dallas Mavericks had a bunch of what they called glue guys. And it was the guys who were the binders for their team. They weren't big names. They weren't guys who were going to go to Hall of Fame or anything like that, but they didn't need that. They had one big name guy, Dirk Nowitzki, and everybody else just knew their role and it was excellent in their role, and they played as a team, right? Glue guys. That's these people. These are glue guys, glue women. They're binders for community binders, right? And that's how you know. That's how you know that you're dealing with a good teacher. Think about Jesus. Think about who's going to be a good teacher. In Matthew chapter 11, Jesus says, he's contrasting himself with the Pharisees and the religious rulers. He says, come learn from me, because I am meek and lowly, or I'm humble and lowly. And it's funny, he doesn't say, come learn from me because I'm a great teacher. Isn't that fascinating? He could have said that because Jesus actually was a phenomenal teacher, a really, really good teacher. But now he says, come learn from me. I'm meek and lowly. Right? I'm not going to hurt you. Right? I'm not going to put some weirdo religious burden on you. I will demand a lot of you. I'm going to ask some things of you, but not to hurt you. Right? But to help you, right? Come learn from me because I'm meek and lowly, or some translations, I'm humble, right? That's what you look for. That's a teacher, right? And James didn't even get to the content of the teaching. That's what's hilarious, right? He's like, no, can you, you're a community killer or you're a community builder? Which one?